Welcome to the Daily Interview for Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson. Tonight, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg will hand down his final budget before the election in May. We'll have all the budget analysis for you tomorrow morning, but today we wanted to have a look at the politics of it. For a government heading into an election behind in the polls, just how critical is it to get the budget right? Michael Pachi is the National Political Editor for Nine Radio. Michael, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you, Michael.
You've covered budgets for a long time. By the time you get to budget night, there's not usually that many surprises left. In the couple of weeks leading up to it, there's usually plenty of leaks. And the government's always very coy about these leaks, not really confirming anything. But then you get to budget night and there they are, pretty much word for word. Do you think we're in for any surprises tonight?
Look, I think there'll probably be one big announcement that'll come out of the federal budget. As you quite rightly say, there's been plenty of leaks already. A lot of the announcements so far have been pretty tame, I think, on defence, infrastructure, health, those sorts of things. But I do think there'll probably be one standout or maybe two standout announcements that they'll make tonight, only because they're going to want something to promote, especially over an election campaign. Because let's be serious, Parliament's sitting for 3 days, today, Wednesday and Thursday, and then not long after that, an election will be called. And the bottom line is that the federal government is going to want to campaign on the budget, and it's going to probably want to use one or two announcements which it can, shape its campaign around. So while there have been a lot of leaks, I do think that we'll probably get maybe one or two announcements tonight, and I think that we'll probably get a bit more certainty around issues like the fuel excise. Is it going to be cut? We think that it is. By how much and for how long? Those sorts of things. Will there be a one-off payment for pensioners and low-income earners? It looks as though there will be. How big will that one-off payment be? When will it land in bank accounts? That sort of thing. I think that sort of detail is what we're going to get tonight.
You mentioned the potential cut to fuel excise. Petrol prices have really kind of become a symbol lately of the cost of living pressures. How much will a cut to fuel excise actually help the government? Because it might make if it's say between 10 and 20 cents per litre, that will be a bit of a cut. But if this is going to be an election campaign that is really run on cost of living as one of the key issues, is that going to be enough to give them a bounce, or the bounce that they really do need?
No, I don't think so. From what I understand, even if it's about 20 cents a litre, the most people will save is about $10 or $15 on a litre of petrol. Well, that would be welcome for many people. There's no doubt about that. And watching petrol prices fall on those boards, that would be welcome. But whether or not it's going to be a vote changer, well, that remains to be seen. Because one of the issues that the government is going to be facing is that even once it says that the excise is coming down, let's say, 20 cents a litre for 6 months, well, then it's up to the fuel companies to make sure that they pass those savings on. And I think that that's going to be the other battle, making sure that the fuel companies do the right thing by the motorists. But I don't know that it's going to have that much of a say or much sway, I should say, on voters, because to a certain extent, I think that whatever the government seems to be throwing out there doesn't seem to be sticking for some reason. I do get the sense that a bit of an it's time factor has started to creep in with the coalition and the federal government more broadly. Even though the coalition has got people through these last 2 years of COVID, it just seems that people aren't listening to the government anymore, regardless of what it is that it does. And the problem, I suppose, for the government as well, Michael, is that Labor is backing this in. So there's no real contest there. It's not as though Labor is saying, well, we don't agree with the fuel excise being cut. We're going to back it in. We're going to support it.
I suppose then there is clearly a lot of pressure on Treasurer Josh Frydenberg tonight. And it's not just to deliver a budget that's going to help the government get re-elected, but is there also pressure on him to establish himself more clearly as Scott Morrison's political heir should the government not be returned at the next election?
Yeah, look, I think so. And people like Josh Frydenberg and, probably his other leadership rival, Peter Dutton, have been doing that for quite some time. Peter Dutton on issues of national security and defence, and there's been a lot of spending in that area over the last couple of months. And Josh Frydenberg, as the person that has got the levers on the economy and can make sure that the COVID recovery continues to take place. But yeah, this will be an important budget just as much for Josh Frydenberg in the way that he delivers it, in the way that it's sold during an election campaign, because people like Josh Frydenberg are also fighting for their political life. His seat of Kooyong is coming under threat by an independent who's pretty cashed up and out there campaigning, and he's been forced to also spend up big in his own electorate to make sure that he does get re-elected. And it appears that as though he will, but the threat from the independents has become real. So, this is a real test for Josh Frydenberg as well in terms of the delivery of this budget. And he needs to strike the balance. And the balance is between debt and deficit, trying to get that down. And it does appear that this budget will show that debt and deficit is coming down, but also dealing with these cost of living issues. And I suppose the real problem for Josh Frydenberg's going to be is that even though debt and deficit is coming down and we're being told that unemployment is coming down, that wages are also rising, the problem is, though, wages are not rising as fast as the cost of living or as fast as inflation. So people have got that extra money in their pocket, but it's coming back out again. So how does he, square the ledger on these two things?
So if we're looking then, it's really going to be about cost of living as kind of the key feature almost of this campaign. With everything that's happening, though, in Ukraine at the moment, as well as the ongoing tensions with China, which have been brewing and have really been a major issue now for the last couple of years, the potential has almost been there for an election with a very strong national security flavour to it, something that traditionally the coalition does well at. A couple of weeks ago, we saw the Prime Minister really trying to paint the opposition leader as pro-China and also at the same time to portray China as being pro-Labor. We shifted away from that now in favour of cost of living as the key battleground.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I just think that the arguments that the government mounted against Labor haven't stuck, which is quite interesting. I think that when it comes to national security, most polls do show that the coalition is better on national security than Labor. However, those polls have tightened. So most people don't think that electing an Albanese government is going to be worse for national security, especially younger voters and younger families. And that's what the polls seem to be showing, that people in that 35 to 49 age group are more than happy to vote a Labor government in and have Anthony Albanese run the country, because they don't believe that Labor would really or necessarily represent a risk to national security, maybe the way they thought it might have been the case a couple of years ago. So there has been that shift, because essentially what's happened is that Labor has come out and said, well, whatever the government is doing on national security and whatever the government is saying about China, we agree with them. So, and I think that to a certain extent that's dented the coalition's attacks on the opposition, because it does appear that when it comes to national security, Labor is in lockstep with the government on issues of cost of living and the economy. The certain measures that the federal government has announced, well, Labor is saying, well, we'll back them in. So all of a sudden, Labor doesn't seem to be that much of a risk to voters, especially younger voters. Now, when it comes to over 65s, and interestingly, people of faith, well, they still seem to be backing the coalition. But younger voters, even people earning over $150,000 a year, so, people on, who would probably be considered wealthier, they also seem to be backing Labor. And it obviously, what I think it shows, Michael, is that over the last couple of years, Labor has been successful in developing this narrative that the opposition, or that the government, I should say, has been in power for too long. They've taken their eye off the ball. Certain things have gone wrong throughout the pandemic, and they've waited too long to react to actually fix those problems. Now, while that's not always right, because a lot of these are state-based problems, I think that narrative has been able to filter through successfully to the electorate.
It's funny what you said about kind of trialing different strategies almost in terms of really kind of attacking the Chinese element of it, deciding it doesn't work and moving on. It feels like such a long time ago, but the fact is that the entire pandemic has been contained within the last term of this government. How much of this election will actually be a reflection on the government's response to the pandemic, the economic response, the vaccine rollout, or again, have we moved past a lot of that to the more immediate concerns like cost of living and really the economic management now that there's obviously linked strongly to what happened during the pandemic, but it does feel a long time ago, perhaps in the minds of voters.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point. It does appear that we've moved on. Just look at what happened in South Australia. That's a clear example. You had Stephen Marshall, a first-term Liberal government in SA, basically shepherd that state through COVID, improve its position in terms of the economy and so forth. But that state decided to throw out the Marshall Liberal government after one term and re-elect a Labor government fairly convincingly. And that would show that incumbency and the way that people dealt with COVID, those sorts of issues don't seem to matter anymore. And that people are looking at the here and now. And for a lot of people, the here and now is cost of living. And the fact that they are, they're feeling it in the hip pocket and they want the government to do something about it. You could also argue on that scale is that have we also become conditioned during the pandemic for governments always to get involved and to hand out money and those sorts of things, and that when things get tough, they think that the government will just simply intervene and they expect the government to intervene and hand out cash, even though that's adding to the debt pile because it's money that needs to be borrowed and paid back down the track. And it's generations down the track that are going to still be facing the pinch. Most economists say probably about 15 to 20 years before the budget is actually back in balance. And, you don't even know if you'll get a surplus by then. And even at the moment, Michael, the only reason that the budget seems to be doing okay and that debt and deficit seems to be coming down is because it's been driven by the resources boom. We're selling coal, iron ore, gas, all those sorts of commodities, and that's, helping the budget bottom line. But just say prices for those commodities start to come down. Well, then, you're going to start feeling the squeeze. And whichever side is in government, whether it be the coalition or Labor, they're going to have to start dealing with those pressures.
Stay with me, Michael. We'll be back in a moment. My guest this morning is Michael Pachi, National Political Editor for Nine Radio. Just having a very quick look at the Labor leadership, and in particular, there's been a lot of work done to establish Anthony Albanese as the alternative Prime Minister. And you get the feeling that in the last couple of weeks, since the death of Senator Kimberley Kitching from a suspected heart attack, that really the focus has shifted now to allegations of bullying and the culture that has developed within the Labor Party. How is this now going to play out? And is this going to be an issue that resonates with voters during the election campaign, or is it something that really is just of interest to the Canberra bubble?
Yeah, look, I think there's a bit of beltway to it, but overall, I think it probably has damaged Albo to a certain extent. These bullying allegations and the accusations of hypocrisy, and I think they're justified because Labor played pretty hard when these sorts of allegations of harassment were gripping the coalition last year, and Scott Morrison probably did take a while to start acting on them and get things done, and Labor was absolutely attacking him. And you could argue quite rightly. And, something needed to happen to change the culture. But now when the shoe's on the other foot, it does appear that Anthony Albanese, is dragging the chain. Look, to a certain extent, I think some voters would be disappointed that Anthony Albanese didn't act sooner to maybe call an inquiry into the culture within the Labor Party with the umbrella of the Kimberley Kitching allegations that she was bullied and, isolated and all the rest of it. Maybe there was room to call some sort of inquiry into more generally culture within the Labor Party, but he stood firm against it. I do think it'll hurt him with some voters, maybe in some of those inner city seats, which are paying probably a bit more attention to these sorts of issues. But more broadly, I'm not sure that it will have that much sway. I'm almost of the opinion, and maybe going out on a limb calling this, but I'm almost of the opinion that a lot of people out there have made up their mind as to how they're going to vote. And remember, an election's not that far off.
Time for some predictions then. After the budget, how long will it be before the election is called, and how long before we see whether the government is getting the bounce that they need from the budget?
Okay, so I think that after the budget, the election will be called over this coming weekend or the following week. I mean, it pretty much has to, because the campaign needs to be at least 5 weeks. I think that's enshrined in law that a campaign needs to be 30 days or just over. So he needs that time. The latest that we can have an election day is Saturday, the 21st of May. If it's not the 21st of May, it'll be the 14th of May. At first, I thought it would be the 14th of May. I'm now starting to think it could well be the 21st. So that gives Scott Morrison as much time as possible to get out there and campaign. And we've got to remember, he is a formidable campaigner. He's very good at campaigning and resonating with the public on the ground, and he loves doing it. But the other thing we've got to keep in mind, Michael, there's all these seats in New South Wales, at least 5 of them, where they still haven't selected their candidates. Now, that's going to be sorted out pretty soon, but you've got to think, once you've got your candidate sorted out, well, that candidate's got to get out there and start promoting themselves to an electorate. And they've left it unbelievably late to be sorting these sorts of things out, given that an election is, 2 months away, that there are some seats that the Liberals still need to sort themselves out on. Look, I think that Western Australia, he's trying really hard, but probably he'll lose a couple of seats in WA. The Libs will probably lose 1 seat in South Australia. Then there could be the odd seat loss in New South Wales, Victoria, maybe in Tasmania. I think they'll be okay in Queensland. But when all is said and done, Michael, I think that we're either looking at a minority government, a hung parliament, or potentially Labor will get in and be able to govern in their own right. But I think this is going to be a very difficult election for Scott Morrison and the coalition.
Well, he did pull off what was described as the miracle win last time. But as you say, the polls are heading in completely the wrong direction with a number of the key demographics that he needs. So it could well, but realistically, what is the likelihood of a hung parliament? Because that kind of uncertainty can be so damaging for national security, for the economy, for everything really.
I think the likelihood of a hung parliament is real. I mean, you've got to remember, Labor has 68 seats. They need to win essentially another 8 on top of the 68 that they currently hold to govern in their own right, to basically have the 76 seats, which gives them, the ability to govern them in their own right, choose a speaker, and be able to make decisions as they need to. I'm not sure that Labor can win those 8 seats outright. I think that Labor might get to maybe 72, 73 seats, and potentially the coalition might go backwards to about 71 or 72. So if you've got the coalition on 71 or 72 seats and Labor on about 73, let's say, well, then they're going to need independents to get them over the line. And as I mentioned earlier, you've got independents in seats like Wentworth, Dave Sharma. Well, there's a chance that he could lose to independent Allegra Spender. Then you've got even North Sydney. That's a fairly, you would think a safe Liberal seat, but Trent Zimmerman is facing a real contest by an independent of the name Kyla Tink. And a lot of these people, these independents, they're backed in really well. They're funded really well. And wherever you go, you can see they've got trucks and billboards just going around these electorates, and the Liberal candidates are virtually nowhere to be seen. So the independents do pose a threat to the Liberals. And, the bottom line is that either side may need to form a coalition with some of these independents, and the way these independents seem to be talking, it seems that they'll back Labor and an Albanese government over a Morrison government. But I do think that a hung parliament is a real possibility.
All right, before we get to the election though, got to get through the budget first. Good luck in the budget lockup this afternoon and all the coverage this evening. Thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed.
No problem. Thanks, Michael.
That was Michael Pachi, National Political Editor for Nine Radio. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson. Have a great day.